Thanks for coming. Here we are. This is the PeopleSide Meetup. Joaquin actually started the PeopleSide Meetup a little over a year ago. We were just kind of talking about that. And I've actually known you just about as long. I think we met in November of 2012. And I actually encountered Joaquin for the first time as a speaker at an event that I was hosting, and got to know him pretty well. So that gives you an idea of his speaking prowess for at least the last year and a half. And so we're chatting more about PeopleSide events that we could do, specifically that Joaquin could do, and I kind of convinced him to be a speaker at his own event, which is how we find ourselves here. Joaquin's actually working on a very interesting project, but before we get to that, we'll just sort of do a few housekeeping things. Yeah, we should start by thanking Harvest, actually, who is hosting us here. Do you want to tell everybody a little more about Harvest?
Sure. So Harvest is an awesome part of the New York startup ecosystem. They do Walkabout New York as well, which is a really cool event that they put on where you get to go and visit different offices throughout the New York City startup system. But their main product is their time tracking app. And it's a really cool app. It's something that I use personally as a consultant for probably 3 or 4 years now. It's a web app. There's a plugin for your browser. There's a mobile app for people who want to track their time and to bill and invoice people against their time. It is the best solution that I've come on. And yeah, like I said, I use it all the time. I think Harvest is great. And there's a secret project that's in private beta right now. I'm not going to say anything about that, but they're going to be launching what is their first new product in a while in the next month or two. So definitely keep track of Harvest. They're awesome. They're letting us use the space, and they even have a little incubator space over there. So if you guys are looking for to rent a desk or something for your company, you can get in touch with them as well.
Harvest is a really awesome company too, because I think for the first 5 years or so that they existed, they were entirely bootstrapped.
Still is.
Still is.
100% bootstrapped. In fact, I've had venture capitalists ask me for introductions to Harvest, and I'll reach out and I'll say, "Hey guys, do you want to meet this VC?" And every single time they're like, "No, we don't want to waste their time. We don't want to, take our time to do that. We're not going to take any funding." Completely bootstrapped.
Yeah.
They were actually Danny and Sean are the founders of Harvest, and they had they were running a design shop, right? They're designers, and so they were selling their services as designers. And the way they say it, I don't know how true it is, they said they weren't very good at that, but they got frustrated with part of the process, which was tracking their time and invoicing people. So they built their own tool to track time and invoice people. And as opposed to their design services, people got really interested in this tool that they had created. And so they just started selling the tool. And they eventually decided to shut down their business as consultants and designers for hire and just work on Harvest, which is a really awesome way to start a business. And that's how you do it without taking any VC money, I guess.
Do you know how many people work for Harvest now?
I don't know exactly. They've been expanding and they're hiring. You'll see on the wall it says, if you're looking for a job, you should go to harvest.com/careers, I think it is. Probably Get Harvest. It's getharvest.com. Sorry, I always say that. I think they're probably 20, 25 people.
Yeah.
Not exactly sure. Not all located in New York. 30 people. There you go. It's about 30 people. What are you guys looking for to hire right now? Quickly.
I think we're doing support people, developers, designers, everything. Just to run it.
Yeah. How many people in New York?
About a dozen, 12 to 15.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But most are remote.
And it is kind of the most awesome team. They're really, they have a lot of fun. They're really musical, so they play, you come to lunch here and they're actually playing guitar and like.
A Grammy-winning Celine Dion song was written on the piano in the back corner.
Yep. So Harvest is, if you guys are interested.
That's true.
So one of the founders actually, that piano was in the house that he bought. He bought a house and that piano came with the house, and the people that lived there before that were songwriters. So yeah, that is awesome. True.
And then, so you're working on a project called theScaffold. But what I'm going to bring up now is you actually just launched a new logo, I think, on Monday.
Yeah, so it was really awesome. Jared is here. I actually don't see Jared right now.
There he is.
Where's Jared? There he is. So Jared has been doing some work with me and came up with a whole bunch of different concepts, and I really love the new logo. It's pretty cool. Launch. I think I just put that up. Was it yesterday? I just put it up yesterday, and so it's. If you guys like the logo, if you guys are looking for someone who's really great at design and branding and marketing, I think Jared's a good guy to come and speak with.
Awesome. Yeah, so for the record, if you guys are Twitter people at all, we're going to use the hashtag PeopleSide. If you guys want to tweet questions, I'll try to look at questions on Twitter in real time. Generally...
Very fancy.
Yeah, I know. Generally...
One second, just half a second. Peter's a good friend of mine. Peter actually has two businesses that he is heavily involved in himself, and he's not going to talk about them, so I will quickly. Peter moderates the incredibly successful and really cool speaker series called Startup Grind.
Yep.
Startup Grind New York. And they have amazing speakers. And Peter's moderating that now, so we're very lucky to have Peter come and moderate this, which is why he's a lot more professional about moderating than I am. There's Strategy Hack. And Strategy Hack is a really cool business that Peter started. What they do is they get a whole bunch of marketers in a room, probably about 50 marketers in a room, about 8 to 10 early stage companies that come down, and they pair about 5 marketers with one company each. They work on their marketing strategy for a day. And at the end of the day, they have not a pitch competition, but they show their work, and there's a panel of judges, and everybody gets a ton of value out of this, from the marketers who come down to the companies who participate. It's a really cool event. So Startup Grind and Strategy Hack are 2 things you guys should check out. He was not going to say it, but I have to.
We like to call it a hackathon for marketers, basically. It sums it up a little bit. Yeah, so basically the format of this event is going to be very open. Right from the get-go, if you guys have a question, if you're interested in sort of digging deeper into something that Joaquin's talking about, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try to call on you. Joaquin might just call on you himself. And we'll go from there. But I know, so there are a lot of people who may have been to PeopleSide events before. You may have encountered Joaquin before, but there might be a lot of things about his background you don't know. He has started in either as a partner or as a founder. He's been involved in several different companies, including his consulting work, as well as a company called Leader Nation that we might delve more into. He has consulted several startups that you've probably heard of. Have you officially consulted for Harvest, actually?
I have.
Yeah, as well as a company called Urtac, a company called Sumall, and I'm sure there's a list of at least 10 others. And on top of that, he's a really great guy.
Thank you.
He's actually probably one of the nicest people you meet in the startup community, which I think says a lot because there are a lot of nice people. But yeah, without further ado, why don't we really start digging more into theScaffold? This is a company that you launched maybe 2 or 3 months ago. So maybe just give us the pitch. Tell us what it is.
So theScaffold is a place where new and emerging leaders can come and figure out how they become great leaders. So they fill out some assessments, some quizzes, understand a bit about their thinking preferences, their leadership style, their strengths and opportunities for development, and then we help them by helping them fill those gaps. So coaches, consultants, and trainers will send content to them every week saying, here, if you're looking to work at your leadership, your listening skills, here's a PDF on listening. Maybe you want to communicate a vision better. Here's a blog post to read about communicating a vision. So the idea is to help new and emerging leaders really understand how to become better leaders. And the pain point, to me, what I've seen throughout my career, is when functional experts, individual contributors, if you're really good at your job, if you're an excellent computer programmer, what's going to happen is people are going to ask you to code less and manage people more. And that's a really difficult transition to go through. And then at the upper levels, right, eventually you'll become, a manager, a senior manager, a VP engineering, CTO, and at some point you stop coding altogether. And it really is difficult you have this trade, you learn this trade that you're so good at that people want you to do more and better of it. But then they ask you to do this other thing that you'd never learned. And the idea is to help people treat leadership and management as a trade, a new trade that they're learning that they can become really excellent at.
So you've been running a very successful consulting practice. I'm assuming that in starting theScaffold, you are, well, I mean, it's not a company that's taken venture capital. It's not a company that is currently making any money. You're still just in the very early stages of this company. What led you to try to make that transition, to jump into a brand new company?
It's a good question. And hopefully at some point we will make money. Before we make money, we probably will take some venture capital.
But it's still, it's a big risk to sort of take that leap.
It's kind of in my DNA to build things, to start new things, to be an entrepreneur. I haven't taken a check with anybody else's name on it, other than, I have clients, but like my salary has come from me for the past decade, for the good and the bad, and there's a lot of good and a lot of bad in that, and up times and down. I feel like I'm writing a song.
Through the hard times and the good?
Yeah. But that challenge, the challenge of creating something new, and having control of your own destiny, choosing the work that you want to do and loving the work that you want to do. I've been very lucky to be able to do that. And so theScaffold, to me, is a way of scaling that. So something about consulting. I don't know how many of you have been consultants, but there's some really cool things about consulting, the things that I just said, and there's some really shitty things about consulting as well. One of the shitty things is it doesn't scale well, right? So as a consultant, you bill for your hours. You only have so many hours in the week, and you can only bill so much money for those hours. Depending on your reputation, you can get big, and you can make a good living, and I can make a comfortable living at my consulting, and I do love the work. But if you want a bigger challenge, you grow a company, right? And as a consultant, that means hiring junior consultants, letting them trade on your name, training them, doing more business development, sales, and marketing, and less of the actual work, and more managing of people. And even then, the margins you make, and this is very business stuff, but the margins you make on somebody else consulting on your name aren't great. It's not terrible. It's good to make money off of other people always, said the capitalist, who's not really totally a capitalist, but it just doesn't scale well as a business. And so for me, finding something, building product is an interesting challenge. One, building a consumer product. I think that's something new for me and something that I'm enjoying. But two, building a business that's a lot more scalable than consulting, for me, is a challenge that I want and an opportunity that I think is, it's a great opportunity.
So let's talk about the opportunity, because obviously you saw an unmet need here. Do you have competition? Are there other alternatives that people who are looking for leadership development could go to besides theScaffold?
Absolutely. So if you ever start a business and you hear the words coming out of your mouth, I have no competition, you should do some reflection, because anyone you say that to will laugh at you. There's always competition, unless one, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. Or two, you just don't know what the competition is. So theScaffold, are there people out there doing what theScaffold is doing? And I will switch back between we, and theScaffold, and all of that means me, currently. There are lots of parts of what theScaffold does that happen elsewhere. But they're substitutes. So an executive coach, for instance, does a lot of what theScaffold does. It's very personalized, but it is very expensive to get an executive coach. So theScaffold does parts of what an executive coach does way more cost effectively. corporate training, learning and development, an executive MBA program, 360 feedback tools that your organization might use, leadership books and blogs and the such. All of these things do parts of what the scaffold does. I like to think of the competitive matrix along the lines of a y-axis of cost-effective to incredibly expensive, and some of these solutions are really incredibly expensive, and from impersonal or very generic to highly personalized. And what the scaffold does is give you a really highly personalized solution that is not generic. It is for you. It is specific to you at a really low cost point. In fact, right now it's free. And so if you want to find something that is really highly personalized leadership development solution at that price point, I believe we are one of the only things out there that you can find.
Well, so let's talk about what the tool actually has in it right now. Sort of, if someone from the audience were to go to theScaffold.com right now and create a profile, what would they get to do?
So there are some things that I think are fundamental to leadership development and becoming a good leader, and there's a lot of good research to back this up as well. One of the most important things for anyone to become a good leader is self-awareness. You have to understand who you are, what your strengths are, and what your weaknesses are to be an effective leader, right? So to know, what can I take on for myself? How do I delegate? Who do I work well with? Who complements my skill set? How can I create a team with complementary skill sets? So self-awareness is incredibly important, and that's kind of the basis of what you'll see on the scaffold right now. There are 3 different types of assessments that I've put up. One is a thinking preferences assessment. It basically helps you understand what's your leadership style, and it'll break you down into 4 different types of leaders, and it'll tell you you're more or less of each of these 4 different types. So that's the first thing that you'll get. You'll see who am I as a leader. You can use that as well to partner with other people and ask them, hey, who are you as a leader? Who are you as a thinker? And how might we work together? So that's another way that people can use that tool. So it's a little bit of self-awareness, a bit of other awareness, understanding that other people are very different from you, potentially, and how might that be a good thing and how might that be difficult. There's also a different style of assessment. It's a 360 feedback assessment. So basically you'd self-assess your skills. That first one is more of a thinking preference. It's just about your preferences. How do you like to work? And then the second one is more of a skill-based assessment. So am I good at these various different leadership skills? And that's all based on interviews I've done with successful leaders. You assess yourself and you ask other people to assess you. It could be your peers, direct reports, supervisor, friends, family, whoever it is that you'd like to get feedback from. And so you self-assess and you ask other people to assess you. And what we do on the back end is we look for gaps. So for 360 feedback, like I said, leadership, the best leaders are self-aware leaders. They see themselves similarly to how other people see them. And that in 360 feedback means I'll give myself similar ratings to what other people give me. If I rate myself higher than any other of the groups rate me, that's a really good point for us to step in and say, oh, this is an opportunity for development for you. And so that's what you'll get on the scaffold. We'll automatically find those and send you content to help develop you. And then the last assessment is something that I just put up 2 days ago. It's leadership in context, right? So you should understand, where do I work? What is the context of my leadership? So understand a bit about your organization, right? Are we a very flat, free-flowing organization? That's going to take a different type of leadership than a very hierarchical organization or a very bureaucratic organization, a very well-oiled machine of an organization. And so that's the newest bit of what I've put up, is helping people understand what is the context in which I am a leader. So right now, those are the things you'll get.
How do you come up with an algorithm that's able to do that sort of, I mean, is there something lost in translation when you just fill out an assessment online? Or are you basing these assessments off of tools that already exist, or do I get less value by using this free tool or what would eventually be a low-cost tool?
you will get less value than if you had an executive coach. Absolutely. Absolutely. The idea here is to take part of what the executive coach will do, part of the algorithmic part of coaching, and that is doing an assessment, looking for the places where you've overrated yourself, looking for the places where your peers rate you lower. All that a computer can do really well, right? So just looking for those gaps. That's the part that we're taking off the executive coach's shoulders. The part that I don't think a computer, at least in our lifetimes, will ever be able to replace is the conversation that you have with the coach, right? So all the coaches that I've spoken with are really excited for this tool because the value add doesn't come from assessing your feedback and saying, oh, look, this is where you've overrated yourself. That's very easy for a computer to do. And then just connecting them with content, connecting people with content that will help them develop in those areas. Again, that's fairly easy for a computer to do if you tag the content well. So those are aspects that I don't think that yeah, it's doing as well as anyone will do. But there's a deeper conversation. So this is just an entree, ideally, to a deeper conversation with someone like an executive coach or your HR team internally or your manager, whomever is a mentor to you. You can use this as kind of just the first starting point to reflect on who you are as a leader and then go from there and figure out how do you become the best leader you can.
Great. So just a reminder, if you guys have a question, it looks like we have one.
Is this a logic that you engineered and developed on your own, or did you use like certain personality tests like Myers? Or first question. Second question is, who are you targeting this? Career coaches, life coaches, enterprises, small businesses?
Two very good questions. This is Tarek, by the way. Tarek is awesome. He came down and he was the speaker for the People Side in January, so thanks for coming down, Tarek.
Thanks.
Awesome at business development, by the way. Question number one. The assessments, there are various different assessments. There are 3 different types. Right now, the thinking preferences assessment is loosely based on brain physiology. I'm actually a certified consultant in something called the NBI, the Needling Brain Instrument. And so what I have there is actually just a quick and dirty profile. If you guys, the idea is to get people interested in what that says. And then if you wanted a real deep dive, the NBI would be a great place to turn to get the next level of understanding around your thinking preferences. And I can connect you with certified consultants for the NBI. A competitor to the NBI is the HBDI, the Herman Brain Dominance Inventory. And at some point we may have consultants and coaches who use the HBDI on the scaffold as well. I want the scaffold to be fairly agnostic in terms of technology and such. So I did develop that tool, but it is loosely based on brain physiology and other tools that I've been exposed to. The 360 feedback assessment tools, all those are developed in-house as well. Those are based on the interviews I've done with successful leaders. And so the idea is, if you're working for their organization or you're interested in their leadership style because they're a successful leader, it's valid because it is how they lead. And so we create behaviorally based questions, which are really important to get feedback on behaviors, not values or personality, right? If you're going to do 360 feedback, you want people, I've observed you do this thing, as opposed to, I think you like this, or I think you value that. That's not great feedback. So we create all that in-house as well. And then the final assessment was another one that I did create on my own, based on organization design and organization structure, just understanding how much clarity is there around the process of how things get done, how much clarity is there around the hierarchy or the formal structures of the organization. And so it's just a 2x2 that creates 4 different organization types that organizations fall broadly into. So that was question number 1. Question number 2 is, how do I monetize? Is that basically it?
Who's your customer?
Who's the customer? Who am I targeting?
This is actually a good question, but
Yeah.
because we weren't charging for it, now I was going to answer.
I think I went there because Tarek, Tarek has expertise in monetization. So when I monetize, I'll be coming to you and asking you a lot of questions, Tarek.
Sure.
Who is the target customer? The user right now is the person that I'm thinking about most, the end user. So that is the leader. And it can be a leader of any sort or any level, but who I think will get the most value at this point are new and emerging leaders. So functional experts, individual contributors who are now promoted into a place where they're doing probably still doing some of that work, but maybe not. I remember working for Pfizer, and I was in the learning and development department of Pfizer, probably 2002, 2003, so a long time ago now. And we were training pharmaceutical sales reps, which is not the most fulfilling thing that I've done in my life. But the sales reps, they're awesome people. And if you were a really good sales rep, right, if you could sell the hell out of Viagra, what would happen is you'd get promoted and you'd no longer be selling Viagra. You'd be managing people who are doing that, which is a very different skill set. Now, some of those skills that you use for sales are fungible. You can actually translate those into leadership and management skills. And I'd argue that for any functional expert, you probably have some skills that you can transfer. But they would be scared to death. Like they said, I was really good at my job, and now I'm really bad at my job, right? And that's always stuck with me, because every industry I've ever worked with, every place I've ever gone, that's been the case. You go from someone who is really good at your job, you've worked hard at your trade to learn that, and your reward for being excellent at your job, excellent at your trade, is to being asked not to do that anymore, right? Unless there's an individual contributor track, which oftentimes larger organizations will have, right? If you don't want to lead, you don't want to manage, you just want to be excellent at your job, you can advance as an individual contributor. But startups especially, you have to do everything, and eventually you're going to manage people, probably. And so it was that pain point, that place where young leaders get scared and don't know what to do, and there's not a ton of money to invest in them. That's where I wanted to put my effort and to give them the ability to invest in themselves.
Seems like, well, so the Pfizer example is a good example with sales talent, but likewise, tech talent would be very much the same. Engineers, people who are beginning to start managing other engineers.
Yeah, engineers, it happens in engineers a lot. And engineers don't often, it depends on who you are and how you work as an engineer. Many engineers don't want to take on the managerial role. Some engineers are very talented at that, and there is a stereotype of the engineer who is not personable, who just wants to sit with their headphones on and work. But that's not every engineer for sure. There are lots of engineers who are very personable and very predisposed to management, but it takes a lot of work to take those engineering skills within an engineering culture and become a talented leader. And oftentimes that first level, the first time you're promoted, well, you're now managing and responsible for a lot of your friends, people that you came up with as an engineer. And that's a really difficult position to be put in as well. And oftentimes people do that without being given resources, without being given the support to become good and successful leaders. And so ideally, theScaffold is a place where they can now go and get at least a little bit of feedback and start to think about, how do I work as a leader? How do I work as a manager? What does that mean for me?
Great. So I think it might be, oh yeah, go ahead.
One question in regards how you train those people. From your opinion or experience, what would you say is like the most critical part for an upcoming leader? Is that like the self-assessment and the feedback the person receives, or is that the content you provide afterwards? Is that like, what's like the number one thing that people don't get? Because there are so many bad leaders out there, where I think like self-awareness is always the most critical part. If you don't get that, the rest falls apart as well. So would you say that the assessment part is the most critical one on that journey to become a better leader, or
I think
like getting the right content afterwards?
I think the conversation that happens after the self-assessment but it should be based on that. I can tell you, most leaders, the hardest thing at that first level that I found is delegation. Right? You're excellent at your job. That's why you've been promoted. And now, right, you're being asked to let other people do it. And the knee-jerk for many leaders is to just say, I'll do it myself, right? I can do it better than them. But then you have 5 people not working, and you're doing the job of 5 people. And some people are talented enough to actually do that, and then they get promoted again. And that becomes a real problem, because now you have 5 people with 5 people under them, and you're trying to do the work of 25 people. And that's going to be a big issue. So helping people understand that. I often like to talk about Michael Jordan. I was the perfect age for when Michael Jordan was in his complete dominance. And you think of Michael Jordan, perhaps the best athlete we've ever seen on earth. At least that's my opinion. But Michael Jordan, I don't think he would, and I don't know if he said this, but I've definitely heard lots of people talk about it. He probably would have been a terrible coach, right? Because you're Michael Jordan, you expect people to be able to do things that aren't really humanly possible, right? And have this will, the force of will, which is something I think that separated him from other physical, amazing talents. Just that force of will, and being able to project that onto people is really hard, right? If that's who you are, and I think entrepreneurs struggle with this a lot, because entrepreneurs tend to be obsessed, right? If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, you're probably obsessed with what you're doing. And then you start hiring people, right, to work with you. And the idea is that they'll work with me. They'll be my partners. But it's really hard to find people who are obsessed with your problem as you are. And so to allow them to take large chunks of this thing that you love and own it for themselves and do it in their way is difficult. So yeah, I think having the self-awareness, to come back to the question, I'm just rambling now, but having the self-awareness to understand that that's a problem and that's not going to scale, that's not going to work well, I think that is a very important first step.
Steve, you have a question?
So how are you defining a good leader? Because some of the characteristics you've identified, one example would be Martha Stewart. She doesn't delegate very well. Steve Jobs, all you tech people, he doesn't delegate very well either. So how are you defining good leader?
That's it.
So the question for the camera is, how do you define good leader? Because there are a lot of different personality types. There are a lot of different definitions.
I don't have one definition. I think it depends a lot on context.
Well, would you consider them good leaders, or Eisenhower, is he a good leader? Do you think Obama's a good leader? I mean, who are you interviewing and saying, these are the traits that you think are good and we should try to emulate?
So again, I hope to be agnostic to that, relatively. And I'll tell you a bit about my own thoughts on leadership, but I think there are lots of different ways you can be a good leader, right? I think good leaders, you have to think of what the goal is. What is the goal of your leadership? Now, I wouldn't have wanted to work for Steve Jobs. There's no way. He wouldn't have been a good leader for me. However, he did incredible things and changed the world in beneficial, good ways, I'd say. Was he a good leader? He's a good leader for somebody. He was a good leader for what that company needed at a specific time. He did also get fired from being the CEO of Apple, right? Because he wasn't the leader that they needed at that point. So to me, leadership is contextual. You can't take it out of context. And so all those people you named were talented in some way, and that talent helped them create and do some fairly amazing things. Were they good leaders? You'd have to ask the people they led, to me. What do I think makes a good leader? I think for me, right, and now I'm starting to think about, I've helped leaders for many years. Could I have considered myself a leader along the way? At various points, in some ways, yes, and in lots of ways, I was just the helper. So when I think about my own leadership, what do I hope to be good at? First, I want to own the vision for theScaffold. I have to be the primary cheerleader and projector of the vision. At this point, I'm mostly the creator of that vision, but I've had conversations with many of you in the audience that have changed the way theScaffold has moved. So it's not only my vision anymore, but I do have to be the primary owner and mouthpiece of that vision. I have to get people excited about where that's going. Two, I have to get some of those excited people to work with me. I have to build a team, and I have not been successful at that yet. But that'll be the next challenge for me, to create the most talented, successful, potentially successful teams that I can. And then three, the third part of leadership for me is knocking down all the barriers in their way. Right? So I have to set the vision, say that's the mountain we're climbing, that's the hill we're going to charge, get the people around me who are going to be able to do that as most successfully as possible, and then knock down all the barriers in their way, allowing them to become great at what they do, allowing them to help theScaffold become great. And so for me, the best leaders are servants in that way, and I really subscribe to the model of servant leadership. Certainly I don't think Steve Jobs was a servant leader. So he's not the type of leader I would want to emulate. But that doesn't mean he was a bad leader. He just wasn't the type of leader that I think I would want to be. In a certain context, right, some people need an iron fist. Some people want to get yelled at. I don't know why, but they respond well to that. And so for them, he'd be a good leader. It's not a satisfying answer, but it is the only answer I think I have.
So in mentioning putting a team together and also in your work in the past, whether it's putting a team around you or working with an existing team, such as a startup that you're consulting, have you had experiences where people that you are meant to lead are actually not in sync with your leadership style, with that servant leadership style?
Absolutely. And I'll say that I haven't always been successfully a servant leader.
I guess I have a corollary.
Yeah.
As you answer this question, also, should your leadership style adapt when you encounter those people to the way that they need to be led?
Yeah, certainly you have to be flexible. That's one of the reasons why self-awareness is so important, is so you understand who you are, you can understand a little bit about who other people are and what they need. And so I think flexibility in that way is incredibly important for leaders of all sorts. And that's something I've learned. Tarek brought up the Myers-Briggs. The Myers-Briggs actually, I think, does a good job, at least a bit of it, of categorizing the way I think and the way I lead. I'm an INTP, introvert, intuitive thinking perceiver. The bit that actually speaks to me most is that NT combination, the intuitive thinker. And what that means is I like to think about a situation very deeply from a logical perspective, understand how I think a thing works, figure that out, and then execute based on that logic. If someone is more of a sensing feeler, right, they want more data and they want more interplay between people. I can be a really tough person for that SF to work with. I can be a bully accidentally, right? I have really strong opinions. And my strong opinions are based in what seem, given my assumptions, sound logic. And so it's hard to push back against me. And so when I've worked with people who are the opposite of that, it's very hard for them to push back. And I have to check myself. I always have to say, you have good ideas too. I know it sounds like I know where we're going and I know what the right answer is, but I want to hear from you as well. And that's a difficult thing for me as a leader, as a partner, as a person, is to include people. And that's a skill that I've worked at really hard to develop. And so as I'm looking to build my team, part of what I'm worried about, part of what I'm concerned with, and part of what I'm looking for in the people who will be a part of my team are people who can stand up to that, right? If they see that happening, and I hope I'll be open to that feedback, but they can push back and say, you know, you're running us over, you're bulldozing here, you're bullying. If I get to that, hopefully I don't get there, but if I do, I need to know that there are people strong enough to push back. And so that's my job as a leader, to create the team that has the ability to do that.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of a paradox here. If you know that you function best in a servant leader role, you might be inclined to hire people who look for that in a manager, look for that in a leader. But yet, if you hired a bunch of people who all preferred that specific leadership style, you might be sacrificing diversity. You might actually be sacrificing having a lot of different personality types on your team, because you might end up with a whole team of NTs in Myers-Briggs terms.
So I think it's interesting. There's one place where I don't want diversity, and that's within the values, right? So I have a set of values that I think are important to build this business, and everyone in the business has to buy into that. If they don't buy into the values of the business, they're not buying into the culture of the business, they're not buying into the business itself. And so I don't want diversity in terms of what we value. Everything else I want diversity in, right? So service is one of those values.
Okay.
I want everyone who works with me to think of themselves as a servant to someone. We're all serving someone. and it's not about us, it's about the people we're serving. So that is one of the core values that I hold with me, and one of the core values that I'll bring to the scaffold as it builds. So service is not one of the things that I want diversity around. Thinking preferences in different types, I think we can all bring service in our way. So that's, I want lots of diversity there, but not around those core values.
Okay. Great.
Could you
Question in the
expand
back.
on what you mean by, what other illustrations of core values are on for you?
So expanding on other core values for the scaffold or for Joaquin Roca?
So are you asking what are the values or what are?
And also, as a follow-up, just to throw it in there,
Yeah.
how do you reconcile your desire to be agnostic with the values and how they're reflected in the instruments that you're putting in place?
Sure. It's an interesting question. So I'm not agnostic with respect to the scaffold's culture and the scaffold's internal workings. That I'll have a very strong opinion on. I will acknowledge that those strong opinions that I have are likely to seep through into the product itself. I'll do my best not to have them seep through. But in some ways I think it's a good thing as well. The product should reflect the makers of the product, at least in some way. I think the first question you asked is, what is a core value? To me, a core value is based on the assumptions of what makes for a successful business in your space, right? So there are certain things that I think, and in my case, that's about leadership. How can we be successful as a leadership company? I think we need a company of people who are dedicated to leadership and dedicated to bringing leadership to others. So the core values for me are around what are the core values of leadership in my model, my understanding of what it is. But to me, a core value for any organization, I think you shouldn't have more than, say, 3 to 5, 7 at the most, things that you say, no matter what, it is so important to our business, it is so important to the company that we're building, that if I were to lose our biggest client, I wouldn't violate that value. There aren't many things that you'd actually go to the mat for in that way. And so anything that's not core, anything that you don't feel that passionately about, maybe it's a tenet, I don't know what you want to call it, it's something that we believe in, but it's not those core values. Those core values should be timeless to me. And so what are the core values that I am thinking of and bringing to the scaffold? First and foremost, service, humility. I think great leadership is characterized by humility as well. Authenticity. It's hard to show and put a finger on, but I believe if you say something, you should do it, and you should live by what you say as well. People will follow you if you're authentic with them. And look, if you believe in teamwork, say that. If you don't believe in teamwork, right, lots of sales organizations, right, they have their individual leaderboard, authentically don't believe in teamwork. Just say, look, I don't believe in teamwork. I want killers who will step over their mothers to close a deal. Put that on your wall as your value, and you will get those people in the system, and you'll build a strong culture around it. It's not how I believe, but authenticity to me is important in that way. Vision, the ability to own and communicate a vision. Emotional intelligence is another one. So being able to treat people well, to understand who they are, their emotional well-being, yours, and how you interact. And finally, self-awareness, which I think is important and closely linked to emotional intelligence. So for me, those are the 6 things that characterize good, successful leaders in the organization that I'd like to build. Now, there are tons of leaders who violate those values, and some of them have been very successful, and some people would consider them good leaders. In the context of the scaffold of what I'm building, those are the values that I'd like to see define who we are.
So those are the things that sort of unify everybody who would work for the scaffold, but we didn't delve much into the value of diversity and some of the places where you really want diversity and what benefit that can bring to the company.
Yeah, so diversity is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think that's probably why you're pushing me there. I didn't even think of it. So, look, I think diversity, one, at a very theoretical, high-level understanding, increases creativity, increases innovation, creates better outcomes. So there's a lot of good research out there on that. for the bottom line and the board, right? If your board is filled with men, you actually have worse outcomes for your company than if you have a diverse mix of men and women on the board. So diversity, I think, actually has a lot of bottom line impact. For some people, they're not willing to take that leap. And I'll give an example or two that I think are incredibly important and illustrative of the power of diversity. Sharia-compliant home loans, right? So banks make a lot of money off of lending people money. A large portion of the world is Muslim, and within the Quran, you're not allowed to take an interest-bearing loan. That's like against Sharia law. It's not allowed for observant Muslims. And so how do banks engage with that huge population of people, right? So they did what are called Sharia-compliant home loans. And home loans are really important because they bring people out of poverty. You actually build some equity in property. And traditionally, that's one really good way of building some wealth and helping people rise up out of poverty. And so how do you give someone a home loan if they can't pay interest? So what they've done are created what they've called Sharia-compliant home loans, which are basically co-ownership of a home, right? You each own a certain amount of stock in this property. And over the years, the homeowner buys back the equity that the bank owns. And as the price of that home appreciates, you'll pay more back because it's worth more. If the price of that home depreciates, you'll pay less back because it's worth less. It's actually a really interesting model that might have helped a lot with the subprime home loan crisis a while back. But the point is, the banks that didn't have Muslims in their ranks, in their management ranks, would never know that this problem existed, would never have the tools to be able to go and to find a market that they could tap into really well and with a really interesting, innovative solution. Same thing goes for Band-Aids. So one common use, the men in the audience may not know this, but one common use for Band-Aids are uncomfortable shoes for women, right? Oftentimes they'll get blisters on their feet, and they'll put Band-Aids where they get these hot spots on their feet. Up until 10 or 15 years ago, that worked really well for a certain type of woman who might have what Crayola dubbed in the 80s, which was terrible, flesh-colored skin. It's terrible, right? It's peach. It's white people, right? It works really well for white people. At some point, right, Johnson & Johnson, I imagine, had enough women of color saying, look, this doesn't work well for us. Why don't we make different shades of Band-Aids so that it doesn't show up on people's skin who aren't peach, right? And if you don't have diversity in your organization, no one's going to feel that pain, and you're not going to be able to tap into that market. So to me, diversity, all sorts of diversity, sex diversity, gender diversity, racial diversity, religious diversity, those things are the source of incredible innovation, right? And real business impact. So for me, it's important to really push forward. And so I've been, all that's a long way of saying that Peter is prodding me here because what I've been doing is doing my best to meet many more women in tech. So technology has a problem with hiring talented women. If you go into any startup, you'll find, not any startup, 95% of startups, you'll find 80% men. And that's a real problem for me, creating a business around leadership. I will not create a company that's 80% male. I just won't do it. I think that would lead to really bad outcomes. And so I've been doing my best to reach out and to find and meet more women in tech and more investors who are women. It's hard, right? I don't want to have an all-male board. And if I don't reach out and find more investors who are women as well, I'll end up with all-male investors and an all-male board and an all-male team. And I think that is a bad way to run a business. Because honestly, if you think you're finding the best possible talent, and this is number two, right? Number one, vision. Number two, create the team. Number three, knock down the barriers. If you think you're doing number two with 80% men, you're a fool. There's absolutely no way you're getting the best talent possible if your organization is 80% male. It's just not true. So for me, that's really important.
Do you think, so if an organization tends to have a lot of one specific type of person in it, is it more likely to keep hiring that type of person? I think that's something we mentioned.
For sure.
Yeah.
So and it's not even an overtly prejudicial act.
It's a subconscious thing.
There's a subconscious that people like those who are like them. all people like people who are like you. If you identify with someone, you're more likely to want to hire them. And you're more likely to identify with someone who looks like you, who has the same friends as you, who has the same hobbies as you. And you end up with less diversity. But even more so than that, if I were to just hire the team that I want for the scaffold, right? I might be able to do that now, but they would probably mostly be men, just because I don't have the network in tech right now of women. Although I've done a lot of work to change that, so maybe it wouldn't be that.
You probably know a lot of other white men.
In tech,
Given that,
absolutely.
yeah.
And so if you just go with your network, you go with who you know, who are the easiest and the people who are the known quantities, which is what you want in your team, you tend to find people who are like you as well. And so that's the double whammy. The new people that you meet who you tend to like are people like you, and the people you already know and you're comfortable with are probably people like you as well. And so I've throughout my life, I don't think of myself, I don't self-identify as a white man. I'm half Cuban, half Jewish, and I feel other. Generally, that's how I identify, as other. And so my whole life, I've actually met lots of people and related really well with people who identify as other. But in tech, it's harder to find people who aren't straight white guys, or straight guys at least, or gay white guys. It's usually some combination of those three things. It's harder to find people who don't fit that mold.
So we have a few minutes left. I don't know, does anybody have a burning question? Yeah.
About scaling the business. How do you plan on scaling the business? Yeah, especially coming from consulting, see that gap over there, that it's too difficult to scale a business. Now you are in software, it's like, I think the product is pretty good. What's your idea to scale it? And what are your plans, like probably over the last 2 years, just an insight on how you actually achieve that? Because scaling is probably like the toughest part for a startup to the long run.
When you're saying scaling, do you mean scaling the financial side, scaling customers, scaling the people side? There's a lot of different ways.
In the end, it all comes together.
Yeah.
Like first user, then financially, how do you want to get a profit out of it? What's
Sure.
pretty much the business model behind it?
Yeah. So scaling users. Right now, there are a couple things that I'm doing. First, I reached out to every single person I know, even vaguely, and asked them to sign up for the scaffold. I will ask all of you, please sign up for the scaffold. Not only do I want you as users, I would also like your feedback. It's incredibly important for me to get feedback at this stage. I'm doing everything for the company right now, which is a pain, but I'm not good at a lot of things, and a lot of you are good at things. So if you tell me what you're good at and how I can make it better, I might actually be able to go and do that. So first, ask every single person I know. Second, I'm doing a lot more speaking now. As a consultant in organization development, training and speaking is actually part of my skill set that I've learned. So I've gotten decent at it, and I've been able to do that, and people ask me to come and do speaking gigs. So I'm going to do that a lot now, just to get in front of as many people as I can. The product itself has some bits that are potentially viral. I hate that term, but you might have exponential growth, right? Users inviting other users. So if you want to see how do you interact with somebody else in terms of their thinking preference, you can invite them. And so that's part of the product, and people are actually using that, and I'm getting users that way. Or if you ask other people for feedback, they're interacting with the system, and they're starting to use it as well. And finally, I'm partnering with small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs, sitting down, speaking with their CEOs, creating a customized 360 feedback model for them, and then I can get a large portion of their employees to use the tool as well. And so those final two, the viral parts of the system, along with partnerships with small and medium-sized businesses, for me, over the next year are going to be most likely the most important ways to acquire users, in addition to social, search engine optimization, search engine marketing. But those two things, I think, given the product, given who I am as the leader of the product, I think those are going to be the most important ways I can get users.
And those videos are great too, because you're basically sitting down with the CEO of a successful startup and asking them what their leadership style is.
Yeah.
So I think in every video they wind up with 3 sort of major bullet points of what their leadership style is.
Yeah, so it's a 5-minute video with someone hopefully that people respect as a leader. And I hope that's shareable content as well. Yeah. Yeah, each time there's 3 leadership skills, and those 3 leadership skills end up with a 9-question survey that you can rate yourself or ask other people to rate you as well.
Great. Any other questions? All right, I think we had a lot more to talk about, but we'll end it there. That hour went by pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, Joaquin, I'm sure you're going to be sticking around for a little while. So if you have any individual questions, feel free to come up and ask. And yeah, thanks so much for being the speaker for the people side.
Thank you for hosting. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.